History of Burlesque by B. Lissima. That's me. I'm hailing from Winston. I'm also known as the Pearl of the Prairies. I've been performing for about 14 years now, and I would like to share some knowledge about the burlesque art form from a queer POC perspective. I'd like to give a special shout out to Bella Gold for her help with the research and the slideshow. So burlesque originated in 17th century Italian theater as a type of comic interlude. The word actually derives from the Italian burla, which means a joke, ridicule, or mockery. Burlesque can be applied to literature, music, and theater. It's often a form of humorous parodies or pastiches of serious, dramatic, or classical works. It was related and partly derived from the English tradition of pantomime, which if you look over there, sometimes you'll see like pantomime horse, in which a musical theater parodied a serious work such as Shakespeare play, with the addition of music, songs, and humorous verse. So here we have some historical imagery of burlesque, early burlesque actors. Burlesque was popular in London from the 1830s to the 1890s and was the specialty of certain London theaters, including the Gaiety and the Royal Strand Theatre. This burlesque did not include nudity or striptease, but the use of tights hinted at bare flesh, and the performances were risque in nature for the day. Victorian burlesque was introduced to New York in the 1840s and popularized by Lydia Thompson and the British Blondes. Their shows included comedy, parody, improv, cross-dressing, risque jokes, and costumes. They were influenced by minstrel shows and leg shows. American burlesque was closer in form to sketch performance, and it contained quick-witted, sexually suggestive dialogue and skimpy costumes for the women who performed. So here is a picture of Lydia Thompson and some promo for a show in 1839. Here you can see the tights worn by some of the performers to make it look as if they are not wearing clothes on their legs. You can see more photos here, some of the costumes. So remember that striptease wasn't a part of burlesque then. It was more satirical in costume, hinting at nudity. So here you can see it looks as though someone was not wearing pants, even though they're wearing tights. Scandalous. So Folies Bergère et Paris Theatre House. The house was at the height of its fame and popularity from the 1890s, Belle Époque, through the 1920s. Reviews featured extravagant costumes, sets, effects, and often nude women. In 1926, Josephine Baker, a Black expatriate singer, dancer, and entertainer, caused a sensation at the Folies Bergère by dancing in a costume consisting of a skirt made of a string of artificial bananas and nothing else. She was one of the first Black performers to break into mainstream white reviews, and she was also a queer woman and spy during World War II. She is one of the main historical figures for queer BIPOC folks in the burlesque industry. So Josephine Baker broke into the American market and the Follies. She began to get a glimpse of the racism affecting those in America. She was so upset by this treatment that she actually wrote articles about the segregation in the United States. She also began traveling to the South. She gave a talk at Fisk University, a historically Black college in Nashville, Tennessee, on France, North Africa, and the equality of the races in France. She refused to perform for segregated audiences in the US, although she was offered $10,000 by a Miami club. Her insistence on mixed audiences helped to integrate live entertainment shows in Las Vegas. After this incident, she began receiving threatening phone calls from people claiming to be the KKK, but she said publicly that she was not afraid of them. In 1951, Baker made charges of racism against Sherman Bingsley's Store Club in Manhattan, where she had been refused service. Actress Grace Kelly, who was at the club at the time, rushed over to Baker, took her by the arm, and stormed out with her entire party, vowing to never return. Although in true white woman fashion, she did return on the 3rd of January, 1956, with the Prince Rainier of Monaco. But the two women became very close friends after the incident. So let's look at some POC history. Since the mid-19th century, Black performers have been a part of vaudeville, minstrel, and burlesque traditions in America. Yet these forms of entertainment often parodied and trivialized the Black experience for cheap laughs. In the 1920s, Black and white burlesque reviews became popular, with one act featuring white performers and the other act Black performers. They were often billed as shake dancers rather than burlesque performers. They were also paid less than their white peers. Performances were as segregated as America was at the time. As audiences integrated, white troupes began to hire one or two performers of color that they could bill as featured attractions. However, these burlesque dancers were publicized as exotics, with producers using descriptors like jungle fever or voodoo mistress on posters and playbills. Frequently, women of color were only booked if they performed acts which reinforced racist stereotypes. Given this historical context, the inclusion and celebration of performers of color within the current neo-burlesque landscape remains contentious. Because obviously, for a lot of POC folks, this is still the case. The Minsky family ran theaters and burlesque houses in New York City from 1912 to the early 1940s. They created shows that imitated the upscale costumes and style of the Foleys and presented it as a much lower price. They billed their shows as the poor man's follies. They borrowed the stage design of the Parisian burlesque house and are credited with building America's first runway, on which the performers could strut out into the audience. Minsky shows were the most nude and were raided by the police often. The performers were regularly jailed, which made great publicity and made them even more popular. In the 1940s, LaGuardia, the mayor of New York, refused to renew licenses of any burlesque establishments, and the burlesque houses closed or moved to other cities. The Minskys owned theaters in other cities, and the performers toured. The most famous performers to come out of Minsky's were Gypsy Rose Lee and Lily St. Cyr. So, as I just mentioned, burlesque theaters fell out of favor after the 1940s, and in the 50s, it was already considered a bygone form of entertainment. There were many nostalgic films in the 50s and 60s that were set in old burlesque houses, and burlesque still remained, however, but it had moved from the theater to the nightclub. Eventually, in the 60s and the 70s, with the rise of strip clubs, traditional burlesque-style striptease and fully nude striptease began to merge. And fully nude go-go dancing and lap dancing became more popular and the route for performers to make a living. There were many working burlesque performers of these eras, and there was much crossover between traditional burlesque and modern-day stripping. Here are some notable performers when I'm talking about queer, Black, Indigenous, POC folks. So we, of course, have Josephine Baker, who we learned about earlier. As I said, she is one of the pillars of our community in terms of who we look up to. So she was an American-born French entertainer, activist, and French resistance agent. Her career was centered primarily in Europe, mostly in her adopted France, where she lived. During her early career, she was renowned as a dancer and was among the most celebrated performers to headline the revues of the Folies Bergère in Paris. Her costume, consisting of only a girdle of artificial bananas, became her most iconic image and a symbol of the jazz age and the 20s. Baker was celebrated by artists and intellectuals of the era who variously dubbed her the Black Venus, the Black Pearl, the Bronze Venus, and the Creole Goddess. Baker was the first Black woman to star in a major motion picture, the 1927 film Siren of the Tropics, directed by Mario Nalpas and Henry Etivian. Baker is heavily referenced in pop culture, most notably by Beyoncé and Rihanna. Here we have Jean Idel. She was billed as the Sepia Sally Rand and was one of the most sought-after exotic dancers of her time. Miss Idel studied dance at the Katherine Dunham School of Dance in New York City, and after a brief stint of Dunham's experimental troupe, Ms. Idel was discovered and made a headliner for Minsky's burlesque shows between 1950 to 1964. Ms. Idel made her mark by performing in white and Black shows across the US and Canada. Ms. Idel's legacy was that she broke the color barrier in many nightclubs across the US and Canada. She brought quote-unquote class to the stage with her ostrich fans and her melodic singing voice. Toni Elling is a burlesque icon who broke down many barriers as a Black woman performing in the 60s and 70s. Born in 1929 and raised in Detroit, Michigan, Elling worked as a telephone operator for 9 years before her big career switch. Reportedly fed up with being passed over promotions based on the color of her skin, the 32-year-old Elling decided to pursue burlesque at a time when many of her peers were retiring from the tassel twirl. Elling derived her stage name from her famed friendship with jazz great Duke Ellington, and is affectionately called the Satin Doll and the Duke's Delight. She also hung out with Ella Fitzgerald, Sammy Davis Jr., Jackie Wilson, and boxer Joe Louis, to name a few. She got her start dancing as the opening act at the Flame Show Bar in Detroit with Wilson before moving to Los Angeles in 1962, and performed well into the 70s. Elling continues to make performances and appearances at burlesque festivals and events, and is beloved for her wisdom and advice to younger generations of performers. She was honored with the Burlesque Hall of Fame Living Legend Award in 2014. Barbara Young, not to be confused with the Hong Kong actress of the same name, was an Asian American burlesque performer who started out dancing in clubs in San Francisco's Chinatown. She is known for her tall, elegant frame and sophisticated routines. Barbara Young had a long burlesque career from the 40s to the 70s. She danced mostly in California, but traveled the United States frequently. Tura Satana entered the public eye as an exotic burlesque dancer in the late 50s. She used her athletic abilities and even her martial arts skills in her burlesque acts, which included elaborate costumes consisting of kimonos, huge headdresses, beaded G-strings, and garters. She also used a lot of props in her performances, such as knives, swords, and a large Buddha statue. Her show was very popular and attracted a lot of attention. She is most well known for her role as Varla in the '65 film Faster Pussycat Kill Kill. The part of Varla came naturally to Tura, who had grown up in Japanese internment camps during World War II. She learned to fight on the rough streets of Chicago after the war. When she was horribly assaulted by a group of young men at the tender age of 9, Tura's father taught her karate so she could better protect herself in the future, and she went to learn Aikido as well. Tura spent her wild youth hanging out with Chicago girl gangs, enjoyed wearing leather motorcycle jackets, jeans, gloves, and boots. During this time, she had also learned to protect herself with razor blades and switchblades. Just generally a badass. Brandy Wild is a stage name of Clarice Gillis. a writer, actress, and burlesque star. She's most famous for her role as Flower in Stay Hungry, starring Sally Field and Jeff Bridges. Brandy Wilde was an exotic dancer in clubs around the US, Singapore, and Israel. She performed in Europe under the name Candy Capital and was the first American dancer to be hired to work at the legendary Crazy Horse. She's an out and proud queer woman. Velvet Ice is a legend from Seattle, Washington. She performs locally in Seattle still and at the Burlesque Hall of Fame. She's an openly queer legend and still performs today. Pillow. By the time she won Miss Exotic World in '95, Pillow had been combining elements of classic striptease with a unique modern twist for nearly 2 decades, while simultaneously becoming a champion bodybuilder. She began her burlesque career in '76 in the standard sort of go-go clubs that featured bikini and lingerie clad or topless dancers. She soon developed her performances into theme turns, featuring elaborate costumes and choreography that she used to create a viable character she enacted during the dance. As the years went by, she became a legendary figure for her artistic and high-energy performances. At the same time, she was a pioneering force in the development of women's bodybuilding in the early '80s, earning awards and recognition, including Gold's Classic Women's Champion of '83. She came to Exotic World in '91 and became a big supporter, devoting time, money, and ideas to professionalizing the museum and pageant, finally competing in '93. She was thanked for her tireless efforts on behalf of Exotic World with a special award in '96, the year after her crowning as Miss Exotic World. She's an openly queer woman and dabbles in drag performance. Camille 2000. In her 20 years as a headlining artist, Camille 2000 worked with many of burlesque's most notable talents, including choreographer Paul Markoff, costumers Simon Soar and Hetty Jo Starr. Having established herself as a glamorous traditional feature, Camille went on to push the envelope with her performances, including introducing audiences to a more aggressive, some might even say sensational, style of striptease, including but not limited to her legendary leather-clad tribute to the Marquis de Sade. She was a proud queer woman, and she passed on in July of 2019. So it's been over a year now. Satan's Angel started dancing in San Francisco in '61 after winning an amateur strip contest at the North Beach nightclub, Moulin Rouge. Her full moniker is Satan's Angel, the devil's own mistress, queen of the fire tassels. She's also danced under stage names Tassel Tossin' Angel, Angel Doll, Angel the Body, Satana Angel, and Satin Angel. Satan's Angel's signature act is to light her tassels aflame and then extinguishing the flames by means of strenuous mammary rotation. She would then sometimes twirl 5 tassels at a time, 2 on her nipples, 2 on her butt, 1 on her navel. When asked why she chose to pursue a burlesque career, she said she wanted the glamorous life of Gypsy Rose Lee. But she retired from burlesque in '85, and after 24 years came out of retirement in 2002. She performed at the Miss Exotic World pageant in 2005 as part of the Legend section of the program, and in 2006 as part of the cavalcade of classic stars. She also appeared at the annual burlesque convention Teaserama and in multiple neo-burlesque shows. She has been one of the foremost queer icons for neo-burlesque performers and passed away in April 2019 due to cancer. More POC legends that you might be interested in checking out are Lottie the Body, Miss Topsy, Marie Bryant, Noelle Toy, Gina Bonbon, Marinka. There's lots. And then there's a few modern Black Indigenous POC performers to note. If you do not know them, please check them out and look online. So Lulu La Duchesse Derriere, Chavika Honeychild, Coco Framboise, Monday Blues, Ruth Adair, Shane Sable, Pearl Noir, Shanghai Pearl, Poison Ivory, Calamity Chang, Zira Lee Vanity, Ray Gunn, Jeez Louise, Brick House, Jet Noir, Bazooka Joe, and so much more. So I talked a lot about Miss Exotic World and neo burlesque. So a little background on that. The Exotic World Museum was started by former burlesque performer Jenny Lee. She had collected memorabilia from her generation of burlesque and displayed it at her bar, the Sassy Lassie, and then at her home in Helendale, California. This was the first home of the museum, and Lee hosted annual reunions for former burlesque performers. After her death in 1990, her friend and fellow legend Dixie Evans took over the museum and started the Miss Exotic World pageant in 91 to fundraise for the museum, continue their reunions, and honor her friend. The museum finally and eventually moved to Las Vegas and is now the Burlesque Hall of Fame. The pageant is now called the Burlesque Hall of Fame Weekender, and the coveted Miss Exotic World title is now Queen of Burlesque. And here she is. Here's some photos of what it looks like. And I've done a lot of renovations, so these photos might actually be old now, but you can see the Sassy Lassie lamp from the original bar up at the top there. So thank you for joining me in today's class. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have questions, please write them in the comments and let me know.